We started this journey last night of talking about what are we modeling for our kids, and I hope you did have some time to kind of think through that. That you process, what am I modeling? What is the presence that I'm leaving in my home? I said if you see your kid acting in a certain way, you might want to look in the mirror first. My wife and I joke as they start acting in some way, we're like, hey, that was you. And we go, I don't really do that, but we do actually joke around about it. Listen, here's the thing. Your kids will pick up some things from other sources at times, and habits do come from outside sources. We're going to talk about that more next week. Or not next week, sorry. This is only a couple days long. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. But here's the thing. You should always look in the mirror first. And say, okay, God, am I allowing or pushing my child to help or modeling this for my child? Yes, there are some outside sources and things that come in through media friends and these things we'll talk about tomorrow that also kind of push our kids and help our kids or disciple our kids, if we're saying it in that way. But I think first of all, we should always look at ourselves and say, okay, am I showing this to them? And that's why they're acting in this way. So are you a discipler? You are discipling your child, and you are the number one disciple of your child, and we can't forget that as we walk into this. So let's pray together, and we'll jump into the next session. Father, we just come before you, and thank you so much for the privilege it is to be here. I thank you for your grace that you pour upon us, Lord, and even in the difficulty of parenting and, Lord, things that we want to pull our hair out at times. God, we thank you that in our brokenness, that you are there to sustain us, to grow us, to challenge us, and God, to sanctify us. Lord, I know you have sanctified my life so much through the almost 17 years of parenting, and God, I know you're doing that with every person that is here, Lord, and so will you just encourage them tonight, give them even a clear focus, God, tonight of what they're doing, clarity, and God, we truly want to raise champions for you, and we give you praise. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. So, talked about the model of parenting, and tonight I want to talk about the matrix of parenting. And there it is, the matrix of parenting. So the biblical principle is this. If you have your books, it says the gospel lays a foundation for my parenting in every stage. Okay, at every stage. Now, there's nothing new. You can find other books and other articles about the different stages of 0 to 5, and some people go 6 to 10, or some people go 6 to 12, or 6 to 13, and then some are 12 to 19. There's nothing new about stages that we're going to talk about. Yes, I'll kind of show you why I divide them up into 0 to 5, 6 to 11, and 12 to 18. There's nothing new about that, but what I haven't seen as I've read and looked at those things is helping us understand that in each one of these stages, we really are showing the gospel to our kids and helping have an understanding of what truth gospelly are we showing to our children as they walk through these stages. And so that's what I want to give for. I want to give you something to shoot at in every stage, that you have clarity that this is what I'm trying to go after. This is what I'm showing. Because the question I can ask is, what are you going after as a parent with your child? If I were to ask you, what is the goal? Like with the child that you have right now, that age, what is the goal? I think sometimes as parents, we're kind of just trying to survive and just trying to, I just got to make it another day. And sometimes we don't have time to think through, what the goal is and how the gospel fits into this. And so what I hopefully can do tonight is give you a matrix of something, a paradigm or a grid to say, hey, listen, here's the goal. Now, if you go through this and you're like, man, I hate your goals, that's fine. You can change it and you can do something else. But as I have walked through, and yes, with my children and things that I've read in the scriptures of saying, okay, I think if you will take this matrix and go after this, I don't think you're going to be wrong going after these goals. And you're going to see that they're biblical and the gospel focus that is there. A matrix also a mathematics term, and it's just this was my definition that I saw, is a rectangular array or tables of numbers, symbols, expressions arranged in rows or columns. That's why I call it the parenting matrix, because I'm giving you this paradigm that you're going to see. It's in your book. You can open up to it. And actually, I guess the page before, we're going to do a couple blanks. But in that grid, we're going to walk through what this is. And Steph's going to come on up as we kind of do this together and hopefully give you a focus, or when parenting can get just like crazy, to say, hey, let me just try to focus. What am I going after? And to make it as simple as I can, but then also realize that it can be as complex as you want it to be. Because we know that parenting can be very complex and very difficult, and there's a lot to it. So at times we need to just be center focused on something, and okay, this is all I can handle, is right here, one thing. And then, there's times that we can expand on it. And so hopefully, yes, I want you to be encouraged in these days, like, hey, by God's grace, we can do this. I can do this. By God's grace, yes, it's all by God's grace. It's all because of what He has done. Our goal in these days is not to just overwhelm you. You just walk, I can't parent, there's no way. No, God is giving your children to you. And they're a gift, the Bible says. And so if He has given those children to you as a gift, then listen, He believes that you are the parent that needs to raise them right now. And so that's an incredible responsibility. God's not up there going, man, I hope they make it. I don't think they can. I know sometimes we feel that way. God, what'd you do? But God has given you your kids in your home right now to raise them for His glory. And so know that as inadequate as you feel sometimes, and that, man, I can't do this, and there's no way I'm good enough. Listen, that's why the gospel comes and says, that's right, you're not. You can't. But with God's grace, He can come, and we are more than conquerors through Him who loves us. And we can. Doesn't mean we're going to be perfect. Like we said, we're not perfect. But we want to continue to press on. And so I hopefully in these days encourage you to say, you have an incredible gift in your child. And so here it is. Let's press forward as we move in this. Okay, so let's just look at some of the direction that I would say some parents are going, as we have, yes, ourselves have fallen into some of these directions, but also as we've seen, just as teaching on parenting and talking with people, and I'll let Steph start with a couple of them.
Yeah, so obviously it's important to have a plan, right? In so many different aspects of life, we need plans in order to really move forward. And one thing that I've really appreciated just in being married to Jeremiah is he likes to have plans, and it's made me really like plans too. But even in parenting, I remember it was not long after we moved here to plant the church, he was working on like figuring out the system of how we were going to how he was going to disciple people and organize things for the church. And I remember him coming home and saying, I was just convicted. I'm like making out all of these long-term plans for how to disciple people at church, but what is my long-term plan for discipling the kids? Like, what are we going to do? So he's like, I spent some time, I wrote it all down, and I was like, oh my word, okay. Because I was slightly overwhelmed at that point in life, but it was really good. And he just put down some very specific things like, all right, at this age, we're going to do this. At this age, I want to do this. At this age, we're going to do this. And it's helped to just have a plan. So my tendency would be to go into these types of parenting that we're going to talk about in just a second, just all of these different styles. But having a plan has helped me not continually be in that rut of getting into these types of parenting. So just so you know, like none of this is my idea. It's just, I'm grateful for having a plan because it's helped me stay out of these. So the first type of parenting that we can fall into without a plan is tornado parenting. I would mean by that just being really reactive, kind of spinning around, no foundation, no direction. I think of like the sports season where we're just running kids from one place to the next, and we're just reactive and just rushing, and not really thinking or being purposeful in anything that we're doing because we're just like tornadoes spinning around trying to keep up with our kids. Another style would be bunker parenting. This would personally be my preference. If I can just keep them away from the world, they'll not be influenced, they're going to be safe, protected, just, close them in a little cocoon. But that's not really what we're supposed to be raising our children for either. But that's another style that we can fall into if we don't have a plan or a purpose or a goal that we're really looking towards. A third type would be blog parenting. This is where you model everything after the newest parenting style or the psychologist who's telling you this is how to raise your kids now. The social media influencers that are out there that we follow. It could be who you read that day. It could be a parenting magazine or whatever it may be. But this would be just the blog parenting where we just kind of model everything without having a long distance plan or what we're really aiming for. We just kind of suck in and take whatever we've got right in front of us.
Then I think the next one would be the absent parenting. And that's basically the philosophy is, I hope they make it. I'll kind of take them wherever they need to go, but I'm not really engaged in their life or engaged in their discipleship. I'll take them to sports, I'll take them to school, I'll take them to this, but not really engaged in what's going on. The next one would be my childhood parenting. This could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing. A lot of times, if parents don't have a plan, what I see them do is fall back to just how they were raised, which that could be good in some ways, but that could be bad in some ways also, if we're not thinking about and really walking through what are we trying to go after. And then what I would say, what I want us to get to is creation parenting. And what I mean by that is going back to God's principles, going back to the Word of God and saying, God, this is how I want to parent. That this is how your word says. It talks about in the book of Proverbs, and you can get your Bible out. In the book of Proverbs, it actually talks about how wisdom was there when the world was created. And so I want to be wise in my parenting. Look at Proverbs chapter 2. Again, I think the Bible gives us more thoughts on parenting than we realize. A lot of times we think because it doesn't say parents in it, we can't apply that. But really, the whole book of Proverbs should be something you are all into when it comes to parenting. There is so much wisdom because what Proverbs is Solomon talking to his kids and saying, you need to do this. So this is what we should be doing. This is what we can help our kids with. But it is wisdom that we need also. Let me just read some verses here. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 1, it says, my son, receive my words and treasure my commandments within you, making your ear attentive to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So yes, in a second, I'm going to tell you that we need to help our kids learn wisdom. But listen, I need that. Like, I need wisdom when I parent. You need understanding. You need to understand the fear of the Lord. And so, yes, we're going to have to seek after it. We're going to have to search for it because I need wisdom as I parent. And so a prayer that we can pray is we're praying, God, give me this. I want to go back to those biblical principles, the intentions that you had for parenting. And so give me wisdom as I parent. And we won't go down, but it gives, verse 6, for the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He's a shield to those who walk in integrity. And so again, that's what I want my parenting to be. I want to go back to these truths. If wisdom was there when the world created, then yes, I want to know wisdom as I'm walking in this creation parenting or the wisdom parenting as I move forward. And so it's important that understand wisdom principles. You can be a believer or not be a believer, and your child still walk in wisdom principles. If I was teaching a class just at the local school on parenting, I would still teach wisdom principles. Now, I think at the core, we need to have the gospel, and that's why the matrix I have there is the gospel, but I could take that out and say, really, to be a good parent, it's just, you need to start to learn some of these wisdom principles, like respecting authority and good work ethic, being kind to the poor, obedience. I mean, those are just wisdom principles that we need to instill in our kids. Now, as believers, yes, I want them to see the gospel because that's my main desire, my main goal is that they understand who Jesus Christ is. But understand, if we just want our kids to be good human beings, then it's wisdom principles that we want to teach them. That's important. And listen, I'll say, I think that is your responsibility. You can't force them to know Christ, but when a kid or when a child doesn't know how to act and walk and work, that's probably some type of parenting that you maybe missed in teaching them the wisdom principles of life. And so I want to walk through this and give you some, because we live in a day and age where it's kind of been told that kids know what's best. Let them do what they feel like they should do and what they think is best. There's a lot to say in that, but I'd say that if that was true, then God would have given parents to the kids, not kids to the parents. And I do believe as parents that you're the one that is helping to shape, yes, lovingly, Lovingly doing it. We're not talking about in this aggression and anger. That's not talking about. We're talking about lovingly and gracefully helping shape and guide and train and develop the child that God has given to you. And so what is the goal of each stage? Let's break it down. Yes, we're going to talk about the mission on Wednesday, kind of, but I want to break down these sections tonight. And then what we're going to do, just to give you as much clarity as we can, and then we're going to kind of break up into groups and let you kind of talk about them if you can. So even as you're thinking about this, if there's questions or thoughts or what it is, we're just going to kind of break up into 5 groups and talk through it a little bit just for the last 20 minutes that we have, and then we'll come back here and end. But just clarity. Now listen, if you're in 2 of these groups right now, yeah, that makes it a little more complicated. If you're in 3 of these groups, it makes it even more complicated. For the Meisners who are in all 4 of these groups, yes, it makes it really complicated, okay? Because there's a lot to it. But that's why if we can kind of break it down, okay, what am I going after in this? And so maybe you're not in some of these later groups, but man, you should start to get your mind around some because they're going to come faster than you think. And so, I mean, I'm in 2 of them. Yes, 5 of them have gone through the first one. And yeah, I'm about to enter the 4th stage. And that one never ends. And that one continues on. And so I want us to walk through these together in this. And so let's get a grip on it and see what these stages are. And also know that sometimes you're in one stage, it sometimes bleeds over into the other stage, okay? This isn't this isn't inerrant, this map that I'm giving you here, okay? This is just some thoughts that we can think through and get us a goal on what it is. So I'll let Steph start with the early years.
Yeah, so the first one is the early years. And the main purpose in that one, what your title or responsibility would be, is we're just to be the teacher in those early years. So if we can just wrap our minds in those 0 to 5 years, my main responsibility is that my job description is I'm the teacher. And if you think about your kid's teacher at school, or if you're teaching your kids before school, you're just teaching them the basics. A teacher teaches them the truth. 2 + 2 = 4. And this is how you tie your shoe. And it's just giving lots and lots of instruction. And so that would be our job description. The goal is obedience.
And that really, if you could sum up the 0 to 5 years, it really is. If your child, to me, comes out at 5, hopefully he can read, hopefully some of those other things. But to be honest, the one thing that I would say that you go after is that they are obedient. That when you come out of those years, that they know how to obey. I remember I was coaching one of the sports coached for years, but I remember as a little kid, and I kept on telling them in the practices, hey, you need to obey, you need to obey, you need to obey. And finally, by the 3rd or 4th practice, the little boy looked up to me and said, Coach, what does it mean to obey? And I was like, oh, that's why you have no idea what I'm saying whatsoever as I'm telling you to obey. And so I had to learn to say something different, how to explain it. It means, listen to what I'm trying to tell you, do this. And so I do think as a child that our kids need to learn at that age, what does it mean to obey? And to me, obedience, what my dad taught us when we were little, is doing what you're told to do, when you're told to do it, with a good attitude. Okay, it's all 3 of those, doing what you're told to do. When you say something, that they should do it. When you're told to do it. It doesn't mean that you do it 10 minutes later or 15 minutes later or an hour later. No, you do it when you're told to do it. Now, as kids get older, I usually, my kids that are older now, as I ask them to do something, they're allowed to make an appeal or say, Dad or Mom, can I do this and ask them? But man, 0 to 5, no, they just need to do it. There's no appealing at that age right then, okay? They need to obey what you're told to do, when you're told, and with a good attitude, okay? They shouldn't be walking away stomping and angry. That's not really obedience. So again, if that's what we're going after, okay, this is what it is. That's what I say. Focus on that. Focus on obedience. Because listen, if you don't get it by the time they're 5, it gets a lot harder. And if you have kids that are in the 2nd and 3rd stage and still haven't learned to obey, you know it gets a lot harder. And so you say, well, when do I start that? Does that start at 3, 4? I'd say about when they come home from the hospital is when I started to realize that my kid needed to learn how to obey.
Not really,
but close. Haddon was really close. But they need to learn. You say, well, I'll start, when they're 1 or 2. I actually think you're probably already behind the power curve a little bit. I remember Haddon at 7, 8 months.
6 or 7.
He was crawling on the ground, and there was a light socket, and he wanted to touch the light socket. And so he would walk over there, and he started to go after it, and I said, Haddon, wrong. And we would usually say wrong, not no, because I didn't want my kids' first word to say was no, because you end up saying no a lot to kids. And so we would say wrong, because it's a lot harder for them to learn. And so I'd say wrong, and I'd slap his hand. And he sat there, and he started to cry. But what did he do? No, he started to go after it again. And he would look at me, going, and I would slap and say, wrong, Haddon, do not do that. What was he doing? He was totally trying to defy. This is what he wanted to do, not what Dad. Listen, that was at 6 or 7 months. He knew exactly that he was not supposed to touch it, because he would do it nice and slow, kind of going like this, crying, and he knew he wasn't supposed to do it. And it's like when people's like, well, no, they don't understand it. Haddon knew exactly. And yes, Haddon's a smart kid, but he wasn't that smart, okay? Every kid, they know they know what they're not supposed to do at a younger age than we sometimes even give them credit for. And so obedience is saying, okay, this is what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it. And you know, now, listen, it's tough. Some of you parents are young, you're like, oh my goodness, there's no way. I remember, and when this is your goal, and again, to clarify, when this is your goal, this is what you go after. So I was preaching at a church in Titus. That's why everybody started to move. I was like, why is that? Because the name came up. It's like, man. But I was teaching at a church, and afterwards I was talking with the pastor. And Titus was probably 4 years old. It was when we first moved out there. He might have even been 3. And he was jumping on something over here, and I looked over at Titus, and I said, Titus, don't do that. And I went back talking to the pastor. Well, I looked in my corner eye, and he was doing it again. Now, I think in his mind, he thought, Dad's with the pastor. He's not doing anything. So I stopped. To me, the most important thing in my life right then was my son's obedience. I was talking with the pastor at church. I said, sir, can I stop just for a second? I got to go take care of this. And I walked over, I picked up Titus, and I said, Titus, what did Daddy tell you? We're not going to do that, and we're going to talk about this when we get back in the car. And he didn't do it again. Now, to me, that was the most important thing. Kids are going to disobey. I didn't yell. I didn't lean over and scream at them and tell them to get off. No. I said, I'm sorry, this is the most important thing that I handle right now, is my kid just didn't do what I said, because I knew that this is the age he has to learn that when Dad speaks or Mom speaks, that I need to obey. That, yes, I knew when he was jumping off, he could hurt himself, and Dad knows what's best, even though he thought that was great. I didn't want him doing that right then. He should not have been doing it. And so that was what was the most biggest focus of me. Are you going to obey? Listen, if you're talking to me, you're talking to someone, and you need to please go do it. Take care of your children is the most important thing. Kids are going to disobey. Kids are going to be crazy. But you need to make sure that if you tell them something, now, if you don't want to deal with it, then don't tell them not to do it, okay? And I'll be honest, sometimes it's like, I know you shouldn't be doing that, but I know if I say that, then I have to go deal with it, and I don't want to do it. I've been down that road myself also, okay? But what I am going to say, if you do, then make sure you follow up on that. I didn't yell, I just had to go over and explain, this is not going to take place. And I don't remember what we talked about later as I talked to Titus about it, but it was this. And I can say that as our kids exited out of 0 to 5, that they did all know how to obey, and they knew how to listen. And I think it's important.
We would practice, which you don't have to use that definition of obedience if there's something that you want better, but I do think when we're teaching our kids to obey, it is valuable to teach them what obedience is and even have them repeat it back to us. So constantly throughout the day, if I was telling a kid, I want you to go do this, then they would, maybe not go the first time. And I'm like, that was not obedience. Tell me, what is obedience? And they'd be like, obedience is doing what I'm told to do, when I'm told to do it with a right heart attitude. And I'm like, okay, which part did you just miss? You didn't obey the first time. Or maybe they went, but they went with a bad attitude. And I'm like, back here, we're going to do it again. You have to go with a right heart attitude. And trying to make sure that they understood it. So we'd go through those steps, like that definition regularly, in order to make sure that they understood what I wanted when I'm asking them to obey and which parts they were missing if they did it incorrectly, because I want them to do it the correct way.
And then you can go to the
game
we
and so sometimes I found that for myself, I really struggled throughout the day because I was home with my kids. And And I would just find myself getting so irritated and frustrated trying to teach them to obey while I was working. Because you're like throwing dishes in the dishwasher and you're cleaning up the lunch table and you're doing all these different things. And I just found myself getting the most irritated that they weren't obeying when I was distracted with other things. And so I think I read it somewhere, but I started playing an obedience game where I would sit on the floor, like leave every other job behind. And I was like, each day I'm just gonna have time focused on teaching my children to obey because we needed to work on that. So I would go sit on the floor or on the couch and I would say, all right, Haddon was probably 4, Karis was 2, and then I had a baby. So I was like, Haddon, we're gonna play this obedience game, and whenever I tell you to do something, I want you to do exactly what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it with the right heart attitude, and I want you to answer yes, ma'am, because we were trying to get that into their minds. We lived in Florida, so that was appropriate. So I would say, Haddon, I want you to go to your room and bring me your shoe. And he would he was so excited. He'd go get his shoe, and I'm like, turn around. You have to do it right away, but I want you to say, yes, ma'am. And he'd be like, yes, ma'am. And he'd run to his room, get his shoe, come back, do it again. And I'd be like, all right, Karis, now it's your turn. And we went over it over and over and over. But for me, it was helpful to take a section of the day where I wasn't stressed trying to accomplish other things. I wasn't distracted. That way they had my full attention. And then when they didn't obey and they had a bad attitude, I could deal with it immediately. But I found that that just helped set a better foundation so that then when we were out in public, which they are the best at disobeying in public, right? Because they know that it's harder to do things. But it did set a better foundation so that when we went out, they knew what it was expected. And we'd already practiced it. And I could even bring it back and say, remember how when I told you to do this, we played the game yesterday, I wanted you to say yes, ma'am, and I wanted you to do it right away. They're like, oh yeah. I'm like, right, that's what I want you to do right now. You come when mommy calls you, you stand still when I tell you to stand still. I need you to listen and obey. It's for their safety, like in parking lots, right? I had my kids put their hands on the car and they couldn't move because I had 4, then 5 kids and they'd be running around and I didn't want a kid getting hit. So just taking some time even to set it aside and teach them those basics when you're not distracted or frazzled or trying to do 20 things at once was really helpful for me.
Remember, you're setting a grid. You're setting a rut in every kid's mind as they grow up is how they're going to do things. And so if you let that rut be that I'm going to do it when I want to, then that's the rut that's going to be there. And so, yes, the whole part about the game is they get to enjoy it. Listen, obedience doesn't have to be some terrible thing. And so you get that, hey, this is what you do. This is how this rut that you want to be there. And so, yes, if kids have started to build a rut of having a bad attitude when doing or not doing it right away, it's harder to fill that rut back in and start the right rut, but you still can. It might just take some more time to do that. And so whatever age there are, obedience in that, okay? So 0 to 5.
And then I think praise them a lot. When we would play the game and they'd come back and do it right, I would be like, yes, that was so good, way to go, and give them high fives, and it was really fun. Whereas the rest of it maybe wasn't always fun.
You want them to see the joy of that, the joy of what it is in that. Now, I will say this. If you say, Jeremiah, my kid's 8, what do I do? Do I start having an obedience game with them? You can, to be honest, but what probably needs to happen if your kid's 8 and you're still not obedient, then I would sit down with them and ask forgiveness and say, you know what, there are some things that I've let go that I should not have, that I acted in some ways that I've kind of let you have this attitude in a time when there's not frustration or anything, and just say, will you forgive me for that? Now, after that, then it's okay, here's what I'm going to expect from you. When I say something, this is what I want you to do. And I'm going to try the best to hold to that, and I would like you to try the best. And we'll talk about discipline tomorrow, but in that. And you said, Jeremiah, with my kids 13 or 14, yes, it gets harder as they're teenagers, but I still think you can go to them and say, I've been wrong, that I have allowed these things, these attitudes, these things that I do not believe are biblical. Will you forgive me? And ask forgiveness first. Say, will you forgive me for how I've allowed these things? As your parent, I should not have. And I want us to work together on this to get to the place where we have the biblical character of what God has given to us. So I think no matter where you're at, if you don't see your child in that obedient stage, it is an important one for them to learn. Okay, quickly, we're never going to get through tonight. So next thing is the gospel focus is, and I don't think my clicker's working again. Is Miguel back there? Thank you. The gospel focus is this: sin, love, and redemption. Sin, love, and redemption. And obedience and discipline, which we'll talk about more tomorrow, can help our kids learn what sin is, what love is, and what God's redemption is. And we'll kind of talk about that in discipline tomorrow, but I'll just say this to start with, is I believe I understood sin, God's discipline, and his love for me in greater ways because of how my parents disciplined me growing up. And so that's why when I talk about discipline, this is not anger. This is talking about a picture of who Christ is. It talks about in Hebrews how Christ disciplines us. And so I can look at, when I read Hebrews, and I'm like, oh, God loves me to discipline me. I didn't have bad things in my mind. I was like, man, my dad disciplined me, and he did it in anger, and this and this and this. No, I could read Hebrews 12 when it talks about that and go, okay, I get that because my dad disciplined me in love. My mom disciplined me in love. And so I do believe discipline's important. Done in the right way, it shows a greater picture of who God is. And you're going to teach them a gospel picture that they're not going to get, I'm saying, at 0 to 5, but you're showing it to them that they're going to get sometime later. And so I do believe this stage of obedience and discipline really shows that. And then the fourth one.
Yeah, the personal prayer focus would just be perseverance.
Still not working?
It's going past. The personal prayer focus would be perseverance. And I think that's just that for ourselves, we need to be praying in this stage constantly for perseverance because parenting at this stage is exhausting physically. It is draining emotionally and mentally because you have to be on it every single time that they don't obey. And that's like 100 times a day sometimes. Like I remember calling Jeremiah and being like, I have done nothing today except for like dealing with children and not obeying. Like I feel like a failure. And so praying for perseverance, that God would just give us the energy and the diligence to stay persevering, that was a bad sentence, whatever, to be perseverant, to persevere. I'm just going to change it. To persevere.
Making up words like I do. I'm rubbing off on her.
Yeah, just to persevere and to stay diligent is what we need to ask God for grace in.
And I say if you do, because I applaud my wife that she did. As many times as she wanted to quit, wanted to stop, and those things, she continued to go into it, continued to do it. And I know it was exhausting. And yes, I would try to come home and take over once I got home. And I know some of you single moms or moms that don't have a husband do that. That is hard. And now, if you are a husband, you're here, you better take over when you get home. Remember, you're never off the clock. But when you get home, but the benefit of that, I mean, Haddon got more spankings, 0 to 5, and more disciplines than any kid. But his spirit and his soul now at 16, I'm so grateful for. And so as much as we're like, okay, this is going to be worth it, it's going to be worth it, it's going to be worth it, it's nice to stand at this side now and go, thank you, Jesus, that we persevered through that. And I owe a lot that to Steph and her in that. So don't give up on that. Keep going in that. So here's the next thing. The middle years is the 6 through 11. And this is the trainer. And this is what I'd say if you ever played sports or anything. A lot of kids even nowadays, I know back when we probably did sports, you didn't have it. But a lot of kids nowadays have personal trainers. As they start to get to that age where they get a little better, they're having these trainers that are helping them. What a trainer does is a trainer's on the field with them, but they're out doing things. They're still running around, but the trainer's right there next to them a lot of times, showing them exactly what to do. So it's a little bit different than the teacher, not sitting in the classroom. Now they're actually doing some things. They're running. So here, the goal of this is to me is character. You're trying in this age to build character in your child. And Kingsley, Jeremiah, what are we talking about character? I'd say this. Character is the excellence of a person in his attitudes, actions, and aims. It's an excellence, or the quality of a person in their attitudes, their actions, and their aim. And so 6 to 11 is a time that I am really trying to build this character in their life. Because if they don't have it by the time they get into teenage years, you're going to have some rough time. So if I can build that obedience first, and now I'm going to really start shaping their character. And really a lot of that, again, it goes back to the book of Proverbs and all these different things. And so let's look at some of these. And again, for time's sake, I don't have time to give you all the verses and everything on these. And so one thing you can do is experiment, is just go look for those. But Steph's going to talk about attitudes real quick. Just some of the attitudes I think we can build in them.
Yeah, so we want to train our kids and develop character in their attitudes. And so some of the attitudes that we want them to have, the godly character that will show up, would just be having grateful spirits. We try regularly to sit down with our kids at dinner time and just say, what are you thankful for? What's a blessing that you received today? Especially when we finish a trip. I don't know if it's true for you, but when we go on trips, I feel like all of us just tend to get really selfish. Like we get to finally, do these really special things, and it's easy to just get really selfish. And for kids by the end of the trip to think that they're entitled to everything. I feel very entitled to the fact that I should never have to cook a meal again, So I get it too. But entitlement. So we just are constantly asking our kids, even on trips or special things, like, what are you grateful for? What did you get that was really fun or that was special? And once again, we have to make sure that we're not complaining or setting that example to our kids, but that we're teaching them gratefulness. We want to teach them to say thank you, to write thank you letters for birthdays and for Christmas things, just practicing gratitude, helping them see that they don't deserve anything, which I know sounds really opposite of what our culture's saying. Is our culture's like, no, like build up self. I want my kids to know that apart from Christ, we deserve nothing. And so even at a young age, when someone would give them a gift, I would just say, do you deserve that gift? And they'd be like, no. And I'm like, you're right, you don't deserve anything, but because of God's grace, you get to enjoy it. I want them to see that everything that they have in life is because of God's grace. It's not because they deserve it and they're entitled to it. We're not entitled to anything. We deserve hell. So I wanted them to see, even from a young age, that they don't deserve anything. So we worked a lot on gratitude and just being thankful for things. That's just a constant thing, though. Forgiveness. We want to teach them how to forgive and not hold a grudge. I do not ever want I hate conflict. So I don't like to go to bed angry, but Proverbs agrees with me on that and says, don't let the sun go down in your anger. So I feel validated in it. But we work with our kids and have lots of conversations. If they're frustrated at night because somehow, emotions run really high at night, I don't want my kids going to bed angry at me. So I'm like, you can't go to sleep until you figure it out with me. So we're going to stay awake until you figure it out. So we have lots of conversations, but I don't want them to hold a grudge. I don't want them to get into the rhythms because that's going to carry into marriage and that's going to be messy later. So I want them to learn how to forgive and get over those hurts and talk through it and deal with it correctly. Emotions. Obviously, this, once again, runs higher at night, runs higher in some of our children. Girls especially, I don't know, the emotions are really high at times. But dealing with their emotions. Emotions are God-given, so we want to handle their emotions in a godly way, but I also want them to know what emotions are godly and which ones are just in their flesh. And so we want to make sure that we build in right emotions and help them work through, when they're frustrated or upset, I want to hear that. I want to know why, but then we're not going to stay there. I want to work through, okay, what is the godly emotion that we want to live in? We're not going to stay in that, so working through that.
Just character and their attitude, and you're going to see what areas in their attitudes do you need to help with. Again, let's give you some thoughts there. Actions, character and their actions, learning purity. Listen, you should be the one teaching them about purity, teach them about those things, not the school. If you homeschool or in a public school, wherever it is, whatever it may be, you should be the one teaching them about purity, teaching them about the purity of gender. And yes, 20 years ago, we didn't have to think of that. But it is something that's very important, that you have to help your kids see the beauty of them being a male and the beauty of them being a female. I remember at a young age trying to help my kids see that I wanted them to see the difference and that God made them a beautiful young little lady and God made you a beautiful young man. And yeah, there are some things that just as a male and a female that we do differently. Now, I know as a child, as when I first came out, I wanted all my girls to love pink and to play with dolls, okay? And they just don't. They all hate pink. I think it's just, God just said, haha, see this? They all hate the color pink. And I think Karis did for a couple years, but because my oldest son is liked Marvel, they all followed after Haddon, so they all love Marvel. And so they're going around playing Hulk and shooting each other and not with dolls. But here's what I said. In their beauty of a girl, they can still do that. That's not a problem. But there still is a beauty of who they are as a princess and as a girl. I want them to learn that. I don't want them to act. Haddon, in numerous ways, we've taught how to act in a masculine way and as a girl in a feminine way. This is what we want you, not trying to put them in their little box. Because if you know my three girls, they are different. And they dress differently and how it is, but they still, I believe, have their beauty about them in that. And that's what I want. I want them to see that. I remember Haddon when he was like, I don't know, he was probably 6 or 7, started to run around in Steph's high heels. And he was running around him, and he loved how they sounded. He was like, this is so-and-so cool. Well, I really didn't want my son running around in high heels. Now, in and of itself, is it wrong for him to wear high heels? No, you're going to find a verse in the Bible about that. But I didn't want that. So I knew he liked the sound, so I went and bought him a pair of cowboy boots. They make the same sound, and he loved them. He thought they were the greatest thing. He wore cowboy boots all the time. Listen, I wanted them to see a difference, and listen, in the world that you're raising your kids at that age, you're going to have to even show it even more, because it is just getting blurred and everything right now. And it is important to realize that God made your child a special little girl or a special little boy, and so in their actions, let it be pure. Also in their actions, and we'll talk about dating a little bit tomorrow, and the purity of that can be shown also, and we'll get into that a little bit tomorrow. Actions also, just to say this, we take our kids each and take them and have the talk with them, okay? Every kid's probably different. It depends where you're sending them to school. It depends on the curiosity of that kid. But again, I think you should have the talk with them and not some teacher. I think it's important to that. And I have no idea. Well, we had a book that we got that we kind of talked through. It's called The Book now. You can ask my older kids about The Book.
Actually, they'll turn.
And they're turning over. But it actually helped us, okay? I knew it's like for 4 to 6 years olds. And we waited a little bit longer because just where our kids were. There's nothing graphic about it or anything. It does help to show how babies are made, what that is, what the process. And again, we wanted to have that conversation. And I think it's important, teaching them purity, we're teaching what it is. Other things, respect for authority. Again, we could go through these manners, many things that we did with manners at a table and what that is, and money, work ethic, like those are just character things that you're helping in that child right then. You're right there, you're training them, helping them do it. This is how we do it, this is how we act, this is what we work with in building their character. And then lastly, their aim. And that is just this, let's see. I don't know why my control's not working today, Miguel. Their aim, just spiritual ruts. Like what spiritual ruts do you want them to get into from going to church and reading their Bible, missions, serving? Like those spiritual ruts, that's part of their character. The excellence of them as a person that you say, I want this to be important to my kids. And so help them in that age. See, this is important. Now again, it better be important to you. You got to model it, but you're showing this is important to my kids, and so that's the aim they want. The gospel focus of that is transformation. And that is Philippians 1:6 says this, he who begun a good work in you will bring it to completion. Let's see if it goes to the next one. You can go to the next one. I don't know why. Maybe my control's dead or something. Yeah, go back one. Yeah, there you go. Transformation. This is, you're transforming their life, just like Christ transforms us. We're not finished. And so we're not mad when they're not doing these things. No, we're working with them, just like God works with us. And so we're helping them see that, hey, I'm not done with you. I'm going to continue to be your parent and help you and work through these things and love you and care for you. Well, that's what God did for us. And so we're helping them see that they might not get it at 6 through 11, but I want them to someday, as they get older, start to understand, okay, I understand how God continues to work on my life and help me and love me. Even when I fail, they're there for me to continue, because that's like what my mom and dad did. And so again, we're showing the gospel to them in how we parent. And then the prayer focus is just discernment. And you're asking, God, show me where those character qualities we see not where they should be. Sometimes you have a kid that will just, they pick up manners really good, respect for authority, and then you have a kid that they have no manners whatsoever. And so you got to really go after that. So those, discernment that. Some kid has a really good work ethic. That's just kind of who they are. The other one has a zero work ethic. Well, you'll learn, okay, how can I help in this? And so you're asking God, give me perseverance in what this is and discernment of knowing what I can with my kids. Okay, so that's the middle years. And then the teenage years is 12 through 18. And this is as a coach, okay? As a coach, you're on the bench as they're out there playing. And that's kind of what I see this year's are. That you're kind of, times you call timeout and they come over and you talk to them, but they're really out there doing it on their own. You're coaching them. And yes, sometimes from the side, if you're a coach before, you're kind of talking on the side and yelling a little bit. But really, they're out there doing it on their own. Different than a teacher, different than a trainer who's right there on the field with them. Now you're a coach. You're kind of letting them go out and kind of figure out who they are a little bit and walk in the character that hopefully they've established in themselves. And so the goal of this stage, it's wisdom. You're trying to impart wisdom to them so that then when they go make decisions, that they know how to make wise decisions. That's what we're really hoping. Because here's what I found is, and I grew up, my dad traveled 8 months out of the year, so we kind of had to be kind of homeschooled. We kind of had tutors that traveled with us, so I wasn't kind of officially homeschooled, but we didn't go to a regular school. And so we kind of had to go to some of these homeschool conferences and around a lot of these homeschool kids, which we never really fit into. But what it was I saw a lot of people who cradled their kids so much that then when they finally did have to make a wise decision is when they went off to college or they went off and they blew it because they never had opportunities to actually see if they really knew how to practice these things. And so then they would go home or they'd go back to their college dorm, and yeah, that's not going to help. So I really do believe at this age of 12 to 18, I'm starting to let my older kids, hey, you got to make those decisions. Which knowing that sometimes they don't make decisions that dad wants. But I know I'm right there to be able to help them, or mom's there to be able to help them and say, okay, what is wisdom in this? So Haddon, last week or a couple weeks, whatever it was, I wanted to go watch a movie. And I could have said yes or no. It could have been easy. But instead I was like, okay, Haddon, tell me about the movie. Is it good? Is it bad? What's in it? Is it wise? Should you? I want you to think about it. I want you to make a decision. And Haddon's like, I don't want to make a decision. Just tell me yes or no, Dad. Which I'm grateful for. Haddon's like that. But I didn't want to because what? Haddon's 16 or 17 years old. He's about to go to college. I wanted him to have to process that himself and think. And so he went to see the movie, and I was fine with it, but he knew going to see the movie, and we talked about it after. Okay, what do you think about it? What was good? What was unbiblical about the movie? What was some things you don't want to have? Those are the things you're trying to get them to process in their mind. And it's called wisdom. I want them to be able to do it on their own. And so at this age, I'm starting to give them little things that, hey, you got to experience it. Let's talk about what's wise. How do you make it? Instead of telling them, yes, do this, don't do this, try not to at this age without first showing them, hey, this is why. 0 to 5, you don't have to explain to your 4-year-old why they have to do it, okay? They should just do it. At this age, now you're trying to explain because I want them when they leave the house that now they're walking in that. And so teaching them principles, and that's why Proverbs should be your best friend if you have kids 12 through 18. I mean, you should read a proverb a day, keep going back to the Proverbs and helping them in that. This is where we go to. And I've talked with Haddon and Karis, and Eliana's just kind of got into the stage. And so starting to give them things. Okay, let's be wise. What is that? What do you think this should be? How would you process this? I'm grateful that Haddon just wanted to do what we said. But he needs to learn himself what it is.
And in that, we still would say when they're under our roof, if there's something that we do not want, when they're under our roof, they still are to obey. Like if we come and say, even if, we're letting them, spread their wings a little bit, ultimately mom and dad have the final say. So
yeah, it's not like this. It's just slowly letting it out. And every kid we let out a little bit different.
Yeah.
Like Haddon, we are blessed that Haddon can't keep a secret worth anything. And Haddon, he can't go to bed. He kind of has that on Steph's side. Did I just lose my mic? I'm sorry, I didn't change the battery, Miguel. Can you? Miguel gave me them, and I didn't change them. But Haddon, with that, he would tell us anything. So there's some freedoms that we kind of release with him because I know he can't go to bed if he's hiding anything. Now, other kids, I don't know about that. And so we're kind of going a little bit slower as we go with those, as we release those. So you got to know your child too, and know where they're at in this stage and what you can do with it. So let me give you a couple things here on this. Good coaching will involve a couple things. Number one, good coaching. Again, we're coaching our kids. It's going to involve direct discipleship. And that's how will you pour Jesus into your kids? Okay, direct discipleship. And Steph talked about the kind of things that we've decided to do, and that's part of it is this one-on-one discipleship that we get to have with our kids that we were kind of practicing and say, okay, let's do a book study together. 6 weeks, we're going to meet and do this. With Haddon, he gave me like 7 topics that he wanted to talk about. And so we're just going to sit down and talk about those 7 topics together. And when I looked at them, I'm like, oh my. And, but they're like, from just crazy. For everything, basically what our world is saying is okay, that's what, Haddon's like, well, let's talk about these. And I'm glad. So now I get to not just say, hey, don't do this, don't do this. It's okay, let's talk about what the Bible says. And he said, Jeremiah, I can never do that. I didn't go to seminary, I'm not a pastor. Listen, there are some great books out there. Just get one and walk it through with your kid, okay? That's what we've done for some of them, is we've just kind of walked through a devotional with our kid and let the book do it. And if you need thoughts on that, you can come and talk to us on some of those books that we have walked through. But it's pretty easy just to find a book that you like and go through it with them. But there's that direct discipleship of your kids. What am I doing? And how am I going to disciple my kid? Okay, we're all called to make disciples. Remember, the number one person that you need to start with is your child. And so make disciples in that.
Another thing that we want to encourage them in and grow them in is Christian community, just encouraging them to make wise decisions when it comes to church and youth group. I want my kids here. I mean, I look at how Justin and the other leaders are investing in them. I want them here. So helping encourage them in that. Also, we've just at different times of our kids' lives tried to personally go and ask someone, would you disciple my kid? Like when our kids get to like 12, 13, I know that they'll listen better to somebody else. So I've had Candace. I'm like, Candace, I need you to take Karis out. Like for 4 weeks, I don't know if we did, but I should have been like, I'll give you a gift card to Starbucks. You take her out. I just need you to pour into her life because I want my kids to see that other godly people are saying the same things that mom and dad are saying, but they're going to hear it different from someone else. So we have personally asked different people that we respect, that we want our kids to be like, to take them out and invest in them. And that's been really, really valuable. My kids love it. It makes them feel so special. And it just reinforces what we're already trying to teach them.
I think Haddon at one point asked about some things, and I was like, why don't you ask Justin? And so he went out with Justin, and luckily Justin said what I said, so that's a good thing. But that, to have someone who I know is gospel-centered in the youth group and know that is so important. And yes, the leaders also that they have there, I'm so blessed. There's some of them that are sitting back there. And to know they're getting that is so important in this wisdom side. Like you want them to hear other people saying the same thing you are and truth about the scriptures, not just your mouth. And so I think these years are so important for your child to be in and consistent in a youth group.
Also consistent conversations. This is one that, I knew it was coming because my dad told me it was coming, but I was not prepared for the amount of conversation time. And I really like to talk. And I'm really good at it at night when Jeremiah's tired. But I was not prepared for the amount of talking that this stage has involved. But it's been really, really good. And we try to just piggyback off of things with kids with like, okay, this one's in a really talkative mood. They want to talk about, all of the heavy things at 11 o'clock at night. So you're on tonight. I'm going to go tuck in the other three. But just having consistent conversations is something that even though it's exhausting, and maybe you have kids that aren't super talkative, and so you can, enjoy the fact that you aren't up super late with long conversations. But I want to be the one that my kids are sorting through all of those questions with. And so even though it's exhausting, and a lot of times when they start in, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so tired, I just want to go to bed. But I'm glad that they're asking those things and that I still get to have a say and a voice in all of those thoughts that they're processing. And yeah, I have some children that are very, very verbal, and then I have others that give me like a one-word answer. So it's not that all of our kids just, want to talk for hours. There's 2 that want to talk, and then the rest are just very, very quiet, and I have to kind of draw things out of them. But just having consistent conversations, whether it's at night or just during the daytime, just trying to make sure that we're hearing their hearts, pulling as much out as we can, and just letting them know that we're there.
Because listen, if you don't talk to them, they're probably going to get it somewhere else. And so they're going to go on social media and find those answers. So be there. And yes, we put there also just create time for talking, because like I said, some of my kids, they're just not as much. So I got to create time. So it's like I'm driving the car with them that I'm thinking, hey, this is a time that I can talk and I can ask them questions and in that. And so create time, consistent conversation is important. Another thing, covered choices. And that's kind of this whole thing of giving them choices to make, but yes, you're still covering it. So I'll give you just one example real quick. Just, with social media, we've been trying. Everybody has a different opinion when it comes to that age, social media, and you can read books and different things. Some people are like, no, you can't have it until you're 18. I think that's a mistake because then the kid's gonna have 18 and not be under your roof at all. I think you need to start to give them freedoms in social media at this age, and now it might be 13, might be 14, might be 15, whatever, but start to give them so that you're there and start it very slow so they learn. Don't just say, okay, you can do whatever you want. And so we allow at like 13 or 14, I think they can get Instagram is the first thing we allow them to do. But they can't accept anybody or without asking us first. And so
Or post.
Or post without asking us first. So it's like slowly we let them. Then they can post anytime, but we follow, she follows them, and so she's checking on that. Also, the reason why Instagram, you can't delete those things like on some of the other ones where they kind of shoot up and then they're not there anymore.
And I think Instagram was 15.
Oh, 15, okay. See, she knows that stuff. But that's, we have the process of what they can do so that slowly they're making decisions. And so, yeah, by the time they're 17, yeah, they're kind of off there. And so, like, a win for me was this summer, Haddon was following someone and came up and said, Dad, I don't think I should follow this person. They just don't post good things. Okay, that's a win. That's wisdom. That means he's thinking through what we're trying to teach him, and that it wasn't just, hey, you got everything, but you slowly are walking through this. And I think with social media, it's not, hey, I'm just going to guard them and never can have it. No, it's okay, let's talk this wisdom. You gotta have a lot of wisdom. And I mean, a lot of adults still don't have wisdom when it comes to social media. And so we have to be able to moderate ourselves. And so yes, if you're on it for 2 hours, you're not gonna tell your 15-year-old, hey, don't be on this so much. And so you have to be careful. That's why we're modeling it, but it's slowly letting. So having those cover choices.
And every kid is different. So obviously, you know your child, you know what they struggle with. So you have to make those decisions as to when is the right time to even allow that first step. So we're not saying a blanket statement like, oh, you should just do it like this. No, you know your kids, you know where their struggles are and what their temptations are gonna be. I mean, we looked and talked, like, this kid is gonna be tempted in this way, so we're gonna really, really shield and guard and then really open things slowly for them as far as privileges go, just because we wanna be really cautious. We don't wanna let them just fall off the cliff, so we're gonna try to be very, very wise and discerning as we give them privileges.
And the last one's learning leadership. And again, I've always talked to my kids. I want them to be leaders, not followers. And I hope that you'll have that conversation with your kids. Challenge them to be leaders, not followers. The gospel focus in that is eternity. And that's this thing of this life is not all there is. And so we're making decisions because this life is not the end. And Philippians 3:8 says, I count all things as lost in view of the surpassing worth of knowing Jesus Christ my Lord, of whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count these things but rubbish so I may gain Christ. It's about eternity. And so I want to help my kids. I want to see this life is not all there is to it. And so let's learn to talk in wisdom and walk in wisdom, because this life is not all there is to it. And then the personal prayer focus is just, God, give me understanding. The Bible talks about that understanding. It's that wisdom really of saying, God, help me understand what my kid needs wisdom in and how I can help him in that. So again, a lot more in that. And then lastly, because I do want to break up into groups here, is just this adult years. I know there's only a couple in here, but let me at least say for everybody in this, this is kind of the investor stage. When you invest in a company with your money, or you invest in something, you don't make a lot of decisions. You just kind of give your money, you give a little bit of maybe time or something, but really the company still is running things. They're deciding what to do with your money and what's taking place. I think that's really what this stage is. You are investing in your adult children in different shapes, forms, or fashions, and how it is. And your goal is devotion. You want them devoted to God. You want them devoted to their marriage, and you want them devoted to their kids. I mean, those would be the top three that I would want. So if I want those three, that I want them to stay devoted to God, their marriage, and their kids, then I'm going to invest in those three. I'm going to invest in, watching their kids so they can go on a date. I'm going to invest in maybe giving them a good book. And I remember my dad sending us books of hey, read this book. You should read this. Invest in our spiritual time. My dad sends a text out every morning to us of just a thought he has. Or right now he's into writing poems. And so he writes all these little poems and sends them out to us. I'll be honest, sometimes I don't even read them. But if I don't get it, I was like, that's for my dad. And I know my dad's thinking about us. I know my dad's thinking through that. So that's important. Again, he's still investing in us even in that way. And so there is this stage of just, these are things, what do you want your kid to be devoted to? Well, invest in that. And again, that shows, as you do that, as you stay committed to them, you're showing how God never leaves us. The faithfulness of God. That let them know that, hey, you are still going to always be there for them. No matter if they make wise or unwise decisions, you are always going to be there for them, just like God's faithfulness. And I think the prayer that you have to have for yourself is, God, help me be steadfast. Listen, I still am watching my dad and my mom to see how they live. And so even in your years, as you start to, the kids get older and you listen, they are still going to be watching. Are you going to still love your spouse? How committed are you going to be at church? Where's your devotional life going to be like? What are you going to do with your end of your life? How are you going to serve? What's that going to look like? Like I'm still watching my family in that. Now, you might say, I don't watch my parents in that. Well, maybe because your parents didn't model it. Let me tell you, if your parents are modeling it, you will still watch it. I do. I still watch my parents because I know they're still modeling it.
We're still watching our grandparents. I have one grandma and he has one grandpa left. And I mean, my grandma's like 93. I'm still watching. I want to see her finish the race really well. And his grandpa, and they're walking through really hard things, like health issues and death is so close. I want to see how they respond, their faith and their example of faith and trust and confidence in God, even when my grandma's going blind, that gives me courage. And that makes me believe more in the gospel because I see my 93-year-old grandma doing it. So watching people is just so valuable. And I just tell my grandma, I'm like, I'm still watching you. You're still setting an example and laying a legacy for me.
An investor. And that's what we pray that we will continue to be a pour in for the next 50 years that God gives us as our kids are being raised.